Hi guys, welcome back. This is Swordwind. We are the Charlotte branch of the New York Historical Fencing Association, and in this video we're going to begin a series of videos on solo practice. This is something that students ask fairly frequently. How can I practice fencing at home between classes? If you're like us, we don't get to meet as often as we might like. So there's kind of a significant burden on the student, as there always is in any martial art, to keep up your practice day to day at home. One of the things that you can do, obviously, is just practice your cuts in the air. And I don't mean to poo-poo that. We'll be making a video about that a little later. But I do understand that that gets boring, and it's also obviously not the only thing you need to learn as a fencer. So in this video, we're going to be talking about things you can do with a standing Pell. I'm standing next to one right now. What is a Pell? A Pell is anything that you can hit. It can be a tree, it can be a fence post, it can be something like this. This is just a 4x4 sunk into about 50 pounds of concrete, wrapped in some old carpet that I found by the side of the road. As long as you can hit it and you don't mind causing damage to it, then you can use it as a Pell. Now, the first thing to keep in mind about Pells, and I want to kind of clear up this distinction or misconception right off the bat, is that Pells are not really for practicing hitting hard. There's a simple reason for that, which is that no matter how hard I hit something, no matter how hard I hit my Pell, my sword is never going to pass through it. That is true whether I'm using a practice sword, whether I'm using a real sword. Anything that is sturdy enough to be used as a Pell is going to stop your blade. And if you are not passing through the medium that you are you are cutting through, then you aren't cutting, right? No matter how hard I hit this thing, whether I hit it very lightly or whether I hit it very hard, I'm not going to pass through it. And so its ability to kind of give feedback as to how martially valid my blows are, to borrow a term that you sometimes hear thrown around the internet, is very small. There is nothing especially wrong with hitting a Pell very hard, but there isn't a whole lot right about it either. Pretty much the only time you should ever focus on hitting that thing, hitting something like this as hard as you can, is if you feel like you have problems hitting hard enough, which is a really weird problem to have in any kind of sword art. So what can you do with a Pell that's more productive than that? Well, the first thing is just to judge range, right? And you can do this more or less dynamically, especially if you're just starting out. You can just set yourself next to, at an arbitrary distance from the Pell, cut, and see, did I hit on the blade where I intended to hit? Did I have enough blade depth? Did I hit too close, too deep down my blade? Did I hit too shallow, too far up my blade, so that I'm just kind of scratching the target with the tip? Now you can do that just kind of standing, which can be useful, especially if you're just trying to get a sense for what is the appropriate distance to throw different kinds of cuts at. Right? This kind of Krumpau, I'm just tipping this target here, but if I threw a Zornhau, I would be hitting at the on the appropriate spot of my blade. So that tells me, all right, these cuts have different ranges. I need to get used to that. However, you can also do it more dynamically. You can do that basically just kind of by shadow boxing, pretending this is an opponent, shadow boxing it, and then at some point throw a cut and say, all right, did I hit? Can I hit? Can I transition from movement up on the balls of my feet to a good solid grounded cutting stance, land with the right part of my blade because I'm extending properly and I've judged my distance properly, all of those sorts of things. You can also use it as a tool to push yourself to be able to hit further away. So for instance, if I can hit well here with no step, you say, okay, can I hit the target from here? Yes, I can. Can I hit the target from here? And so forth and so on. The other thing you can, so that's one exercise, is just distance and the training and management thereof. Something else you can do, and the reason you might want to mark off kind of bands on your Pell, is to just kind of practice hitting different targets. You can make your Pell more or less complex. What I've done here, as you can see, is mark off a band that's roughly at head height, one that's roughly at shoulder height, and one that's kind of about hip height. So if I want to be sure that I am hitting somebody's head, for instance with my Zornhau, I want to be sure that I am between this band and this band when I strike. If I strike down here, then I'm not really training my body to go for the target that I want to train my body to go for. So that's the second exercise you can do with the Pell. And of course you can do this with any kind of cut. I'm demonstrating it with Zornhaus, but you can do Krumphaus, Zwerhaus. You can also, of course, practice cutting to different other parts of the body, right? Maybe with an Unterhau to the lower opening, or Zwerch to the plow. The third thing you can do with a standing Pell is specifically, if you want to specifically kind of get the feel for what it's like to hit somebody in sparring. Now the fact that the Pell is a solid object that my sword is not going to pass through is actually a virtue, right? For instance, I can throw combination Zwerchau in the air. It does have a different feel when you're actually hitting something. Now that's, I don't want to make too much of that exercise, of course, because most people get into HEMA trying to learn what it's like to fight with a real sword. So anytime you focus too much on something that is practice sword specific or sparring specific, you run the risk of kind of getting away from that goal. Nevertheless, as part of a balanced training regimen, there is a lot of value to this, and I certainly find that there's a different feel, just the fact that I have a physical target when I'm practicing combinations. In a similar vein, one of the things that's very difficult to you to do in the air is figure out whether you've withdrawn enough. So whether you come from a tradition that does a lot of combination cutting, or you come from one like kind of our focus at Swordwind doesn't have a lot of combination cuts per se, but there is always the need to withdraw under cover after you have successfully struck somebody. So I strike somebody and then I need to withdraw out of distance in some sort of guard because they might not be dead, or rather they might not be disabled. And certainly in a sparring or competitive context, most HEMA events will give your opponent an opportunity to strike you back even if you landed a good solid hit first. So if I do that in the air, right, I can cut, I can withdraw, but I don't know if I've withdrawn far enough because I don't have a physical reference point in front of me. With a Pell, I can strike, withdraw, and say, okay, there's a good distance between my sword and the thing that I hit. I have withdrawn far enough, as opposed to, for instance, striking and then going, all right, I maybe haven't really withdrawn far enough here. And if I didn't have the physical object as a reference point, I wouldn't necessarily be able to keep myself honest that way as I'm practicing striking and withdrawing safely. The other thing Pells can be very useful for, as because there's a physical reference point, is practicing circularity in your footwork. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily kind of spiraling around an opponent out of distance, but especially if we're just kind of cutting in the air, it's very easy to fall into this trap of thinking that fencing only goes forward and backwards and maybe occasionally off to the side a little bit. And without wanting to kind of advocate for mindless circling, there is a difference between striking straight towards an opponent and striking with the same passing step or spring step or whatever your step is off the original line. Now you can do this in the air, but it's easier if you have something to physically make sure that you are moving around. So that you can see how much am I circling this thing, and also am I circling it while maintaining my distance. For instance, if I throw a cut and then do a follow-up cut in the air, I know that I've moved around, but I don't know that I've managed to maintain my distance relative to the original point. Whereas if I have a Pell in front of me, I can do something like this and say, okay, I have managed to move about 45 to 90 degrees offline from this thing, and I'm still hitting it, as opposed to going like this and then realizing, oh, I have moved around, that my angle was the same, but I did not maintain my distance relative to the target as I did so, and so that second cut would have missed. If I didn't have the Pell to keep me honest about that, I might not have known. So, I hope this has been useful. There's one thing not to do with Pells, which is to use them just to beat on mindlessly. And 4 things that you can use a Pell for very productively, which is managing and maintaining your distance, managing and maintaining your angle, practicing practicing combinations against a physical object, and practicing honest withdrawals. One last thing before we go, I've been doing this with a fetter because there's no point in using a real sword against a Pell. One thing you can do with your fetters or with your wasters, if you, as kind of a guide, is you can add markings to the blade itself. So what I've done here is I've added some blue electrical tape at the point that differentiates the strong from the weak of my blade, and I've added another another band of tape in a different color at the point that represents kind of a generic ideal cutting spot on my blade, which is halfway down the weak, basically. Obviously that's plus or minus depending on the specific geometry of whatever specific real sword we're dealing with. But as kind of for marking a waster and kind of imagining the prototypical average cutting sweet spot, about 25% of the way down the blade is good. What this marking does is give me a better idea, am I hitting too deep or too shallow when I strike my Pell. So for instance, I can do this. You guys can probably see the red on the camera. I have hit way too deep on my blade. If you're experienced enough with cutting to understand where your sweet spot is just by looking, then that's fine. But if you're not, this can be a useful way to kind of add extra feedback to your distance management use of a Pell. So I hope this has been useful. I'll be trying to follow up with more of these kind of ways to practice fencing at home videos. If there's anything specific you'd like to see, go ahead and leave me a comment, and we'll see you next week.